Some of the most dangerous criminals in American history left behind final resting places that tell stories darker than any crime they ever committed. Today, we're visiting the graves of outlaws and gangsters, whose names once terrified an entire nation. Each burial site holds secrets, just years, months, or even days after their violent ends came knocking. Al Capone, the legendary Chicago mob boss, laid to rest at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, in January 1947. Originally buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery, 5 years later, his family moved his remains, fearing vandalism and theft, at only 48 years old. The man who once controlled Chicago's underworld now rests beneath a modest gray marker. Jesse James, the notorious train and bank robber, buried at his family farm in Kearney, Missouri. In April 1882, Jesse was only 34 years old. His mother stood watch over the grave for 20 years, charging visitors 50 cents for tours. 2 decades later, in 1902, his body was moved to Mount Olivet Cemetery to rest beside his wife, Zerelda. The grave had been dug up and moved 3 different times. Bonnie Parker, the young woman who chose crime over everything, photographed with Clyde Barrow beside their stolen Ford. In early May 1934, less than 3 weeks later, on May 23rd, law enforcement ambushed them on a Louisiana highway, firing 167 rounds into their vehicle. She died at 23 years old. In her final poem written before her death, she predicted they would go down together and be buried side by side. But her grief-stricken mother refused. Bonnie was laid to rest at Crown Hill Memorial Park in Dallas, 10 miles away from Clyde, her last wish denied, even in death. Clyde Barrow, photographed smiling beside Bonnie Parker, holding weapons in front of their getaway car. In May 1934, days later, on May 23rd, Texas Rangers and FBI agents opened fire, killing him instantly on a remote Louisiana road. At only 25 years old, he shares a single headstone with his brother Buck, who had been killed in a shootout less than a year earlier. The brothers rest together at Western Heights Cemetery in Dallas, while Bonnie remains separated, buried in a different cemetery. Their descendants still fight today, trying to reunite the infamous lovers, Billy the Kid, the young gunslinger, and cattle rustler, captured in a tintype photograph at Fort Sumner. In early July 1881, hiding at Pete Maxwell's ranch. Just days later, on July 14th, Sheriff Pat Garrett shot him dead in a darkened bedroom. The Kid was only 21 years old, buried the very next morning in the old military cemetery at Fort Sumner, between his 2 fallen companions, Tom O'Folliard and Charlie Bowdre. A simple wooden marker was placed over their shared grave, with one word carved into it: Pals. 8 years later, in 1889, a massive flood from the Pecos River washed away the entire cemetery, scattering headstones and bones across the desert. Old-timers were asked to remember where Billy was buried. Some pinpointed the exact spot. Others just made their best guess. The current gravesite might not even hold his actual remains. John Dillinger, America's first public enemy, photographed outside the Lake County Jail in Crown Point, Indiana. In March 1934, escaped using what some claim was a fake wooden pistol. 4 months later, on July 22nd, FBI agents gunned him down outside Chicago's Biograph Theater. After he watched a movie called Manhattan Melodrama, he died at 31 years old, buried at Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis, just 3 days after his death. On July 25th, 1934, A crowd of 5,000 people swarmed the cemetery. Mourners fought to grab flowers, handfuls of dirt, anything they could take as souvenirs. Days after the funeral, his father returned in secret and had the casket dug up, then reburied beneath layers of concrete and scrap iron. Dion O'Bannon, the Irish mobster who controlled Chicago's North Side, photographed at his flower shop on North State Street. In early November 1924, a legitimate businessman by day, a bootlegger and killer by night. Just days later, on November 10th, rival gangsters walked into his shop, pretending to order flowers for a funeral, then shot him dead among the roses and carnations. At only 32 years old, Cardinal Mundelein refused him burial on consecrated ground. His wife pleaded for 5 months. Finally, his body was moved to Mount Carmel Cemetery. A monument reading, "My Sweetheart," was placed over his grave. The cardinal ordered it removed immediately, but a later obelisk was allowed to remain. His grave now rests directly across the road from the bishop's mausoleum, one of the most sacred sections of the entire cemetery. George "Bugs" Moran, the gangster who barely escaped the Street Valentine's Day massacre, photographed after avoiding death. In February 1929, 7 of his men were lined up against a warehouse wall and machine-gunned by men dressed as police. Moran arrived late that morning and saw the police cars outside. He walked away, never entering the garage. That same day, his entire gang was wiped out. He survived for decades after. But 40 years later, in February 1957, he died alone in federal prison from lung cancer at 64 years old, buried in a pauper's grave, unmarked and forgotten. The man who once ruled Chicago's North Side ended up in an anonymous plot. Frank Nitti, Al Capone's enforcer and successor, photographed at the height of his power in Chicago in early 1943. Known as the Enforcer, he took control of the Chicago outfit after Capone went to prison at 57 years old, buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery in the same grounds as his former boss. His simple grave marker bears no indication of the violence he inflicted or the empire he controlled. Pretty Boy Floyd, the notorious bank robber during the Great Depression, photographed after a robbery in the Midwest. In October 1934, wanted for multiple murders, including the Kansas City Massacre. Just days later, on October 22nd, FBI agents cornered him in a cornfield in East Liverpool, Ohio. He tried to run. They opened fire. He died in the dirt at only 30 years old. His body was returned to Oklahoma, where 20,000 people attended his funeral, more than had attended any other funeral in state history. Farmers and working-class families mourned him as a Robin Hood figure. He was buried at Aiken Cemetery, in a simple grave that still receives flowers today. Machine Gun Kelly, the kidnapper and bootlegger, photographed with his trademark Thompson submachine gun in 1933, famous for the kidnapping of oil tycoon Charles Urschel, demanding a $200,000 ransom. Less than a year later, in July 1933, FBI agents tracked him to a house in Memphis. He surrendered without firing a single shot, reportedly shouting, "Don't shoot, G-men," creating the famous nickname for federal agents. Sentenced to life in Alcatraz. 21 years later, on July 18th, 1954, he died in Leavenworth Prison from a heart attack at 59 years old, buried at Cottondale Cemetery in Wise County, Texas. His grave is simple, bearing only his real name, George Kelly Barnes. No mention of the machine gun or the crimes that made him infamous. Babyface Nelson, the violent bank robber who killed more FBI agents than any criminal in history, photographed with John Dillinger's gang in Wisconsin. In April 1934, known for his short temper and youthful appearance, 7 months later, on November 27th, FBI agents spotted him driving a stolen Ford near Barrington, Illinois. A furious gun battle erupted on the highway. He killed 2 federal agents, Special Agent Herman Hollis and Inspector Samuel Cowley. Hours later, at a safe house in Wilmette, he died from 17 bullet wounds. At only 25 years old, his wife Helen wrapped his naked body in a blanket and dumped it near St. Peter Catholic Cemetery. He was later buried at St. Joseph Cemetery in River Grove, Illinois, under his real name, Lester Joseph Gillis. The headstone reads simply, "Son, died the 27th of November, 1934, age 26 years. Butch Cassidy, the charming leader of the Wild Bunch, photographed with the Sundance Kid and their gang. In 1900, fled to Bolivia with Harry Longabaugh to escape the Pinkerton Detective Agency. 8 years later, on November 6th, 1908, 2 American bandits robbed a mining company payroll near the village of San Vicente, Bolivia. The Bolivian cavalry surrounded their hideout. A shootout lasted for hours. The next morning, soldiers found 2 bodies inside. They were buried in unmarked graves in the small San Vicente cemetery. But 83 years later, in 1991, forensic anthropologist Clyde Snow exhumed the bodies. DNA tests proved the remains were not Cassidy or Sundance. They were likely a German miner named Gustav Zimmer. Cassidy's sister claimed he returned to America, lived under an alias, and died in 1937. His actual burial location remains a family secret to this day. The Sundance Kid, Harry Longabaugh, the fastest gun in the Wild Bunch, last seen alive in San Vicente, Bolivia. In November 1908, cornered with Butch Cassidy in a rented boarding house. That same night, Bolivian soldiers opened fire. He was found slumped against a wall, at only 41 years old, buried beside the man believed to be Cassidy, in an unmarked grave. The cemetery in San Vicente still bears a sign. Here lie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But DNA evidence proved the bodies belonged to someone else entirely. The real Sundance Kid's final resting place, like his partners, remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the American West.